Ladies and gentlemen, what's good? We're back with another Call of Duty Mobile video. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day today. Season 2 has arrived, and that means it's time for our top 5 guns of Call of Duty Mobile this season. Now, before we hop into this, I want to go ahead and say something about last season's top 5. I was wrong about one. I got a little bit overzealous with our top 5. I was really excited for the PPSH, and while I do think it's a really underrated gun right now, I can definitively say it's not the #1 option in the game. So you're going to see that a little bit lower on the list, but for the most part, I feel pretty confident about the rest of the list, and given some changes, I'm excited to see what the meta is going to shape up for this season. I want to give a big shout out to Call of Duty Mobile for sponsoring this video. If you guys haven't already, you can download Call of Duty Mobile using the link down in the description. But without any more talking, we're going to go ahead and hop into the action. So off the start, obviously, we do have our honorable mentions. And the first one that we have in here is one that I didn't really expect to be making an appearance. But I've watched a lot of competitive play over the past couple of days and saw a gun in there that I hadn't seen in a really long time, and that was the R9 shotgun. Now, the R9 is a really interesting weapon because obviously it has a very different style of fire than any other shotgun, but it also has more potential to stack ADS bullet spread than any other shotgun. Because of that, you can pretty quickly two-tap at a pretty significant range, and especially whenever it comes to holding down hardpoint, it is an absolute monster. It's not really a gun that's made a whole lot of appearances in green at COD Mobile, but in global on both the EU and the NA sides of things, I've seen a lot of players absolutely smoke a map like Standoff or Summit with it, and it's definitely one that I'm looking forward to checking out a little bit more, as it looks like it's going to be in the competitive scene to stay. I know the go-to shotgun for green is obviously the KRM and has a very different playstyle, but I feel like the R9 is one that you guys are definitely going to want to check out as it does start to become more and more popular. Our other honorable mention is going to... Yes, I changed shirts. Don't worry about it. Our other honorable mention is going to go to the PPSH, which, like I mentioned, might have overrated a little bit in our last video. Now, don't misconstrue this as me saying the PPSH is bad, because to be honest, this is probably the tightest that the top 5 guns have ever been, and it could very easily make its way into the top 3, depending on some balance changes that we may see in the future to other guns that are currently in the top 5. The two primary things that do hold back the PPSH are its recoil pattern and also some of the hitboxes that make it a little bit more inconsistent in regards to its foretap. Now, with that being said, I personally believe that the PPSH is the best full-on aggressive gun in the game, especially whenever you equip the 35-round magazine. It is way more effective up in the close range than the CBR, but the CBR is a lot more versatile. So, because of the versatility of the CBR, it does push the PPSH a little bit further out than I would like for it to be, but I genuinely believe that in the next couple balance changes, more than likely we'll see it move back into the top 5. Now, moving on to our official top 5, we do have our number 5 gun. This is a gun that probably realistically last season would have been the #1 if I hadn't put the PPSH in there, and that's going to be the Type 25, which actually got a pretty big nerf, although looking at it initially, you might not quite notice it. The nerf listed in the patch notes for the Type 25 was a nerf to the bullet spread accuracy of around 25%, and also a nerf to the hit flinch of around 15%. Now, I've seen a lot of people talking about this and saying, Bobby, this is not a significant nerf. All you have to do is put attachments on there to compensate for it. Yeah, that's what you do to counter any type of nerf, regardless of whether or not it affects damage or range. See, the thing that this nerf does, especially with the bullet spread accuracy nerf, is it has a little bit of a chain reaction. It effectively forces you to not use the monolithic suppressor, which indirectly reduces the damage range of the gun by about 25%. There are also multiple significant nerfs to magazines alongside a nerf to the reload speed of the gun, so now you're pretty much forced to use the 38-round magazine. On top of that, because of the hit flinch, you also need to use the RTC steady stock, which is really a decent option, but doesn't really actually give you a whole lot of advantage whenever it comes to taking gunfights. That's just to compensate for the nerfs that exist. Then on top of that, it requires you to throw on the granulated grip tape, which most people didn't use previously, so that's another attachment that you can't use to go towards something like ADS speed, damage range, whatever that would be. All that combined, and the nerf to the Type 25 has a much bigger impact than it might have previously seen. Now, that being said, it's still an incredibly viable option, but you're gonna start to see, especially in the long range, that it's gonna be a lot more difficult to consistently hit those sprays. The longer you spray, the more the bullet spread accuracy starts to affect your gun, and especially when you don't have that extra 25% range from the monolithic suppressor, you're gonna feel it pretty hard. Because you really have to build it out to be able to take range gunfights, that in turn also makes it less effective in the close range, where previously it had a time to kill of around 220 milliseconds. The gun's still viable, and I've seen a lot of pro players say they still think it's top 2, but there's no question in my mind that this is not going to be one of those top 2 guns as we get further and further into the season and people start to adjust more and more. Coming into the #4 spot, it's 2 guns that I've been cop-outing and putting them in the same spot, but once again, they have very similar purposes. If you haven't heard me talk about it in past videos, the SKS and the SVD, two incredibly powerful long-range guns, definitely the strongest long-range guns in the game, that are only this low on this list simply because they require a little bit more skill to use than some of the other options. Each of them has their own individual upsides. Obviously, the SKS a much faster rate of fire, but will only one tap to the head, and also has the potential to require a 3-tap, which drops off the time to kill pretty significantly. As long as you're hitting your 2 taps, you are going to have a time to kill range pretty close to about 200 milliseconds. The SVD, on the other hand, has pretty ridiculous 1-tap zones, and actually is pretty similar to the Outlaw in every way, shape, or form, except for the fact that it has a way bigger magazine and also has a way faster rate of fire. The only real downside for the SVD is it does have a 1-shot kill drop off of around 40 meters, so you might want to stack a little bit more range depending on the map that you're playing, but both of these are incredibly powerful in the long range, like I mentioned previously, and can be very, very versatile depending on the map that you're playing. The SVD is actually so powerful that it was banned for Stage 5 of COD Mobile Champs and has not been nerfed since then, so that gives you a little bit of a frame of reference for just how good this gun is. Toughness is absolutely going to be a must-have on both of these, being that they are marksman slash sniper, so keep that in mind. But outside of that, if you get a good long-range map like your crossfires and your firing range, you can get ready to absolutely run things. Now, at the number 3 and 2 spot is where things started to get a little bit difficult for me to decide. On the one hand, I want this to be an objective top 5 best guns in the game, but if that was the case, the SVD and the SKS would be a lot higher. A lot of this list is geared toward how it's going to play for players that might not be at the highest skill level of the game. So if I was going to be making a top 5 list for pro players, it would look a lot different. But because this list is not made just for pro players, but for ranked players and people that might not be as experienced, I am going to be putting the Kilo at the number 3 spot. The Kilo was already an amazing option, and I said previously that if the Type 25 got a nerf, it would probably move into the top 5. On top of the fact that the Type 25 got a nerf, the Kilo also got a buff to its recoil. The horizontal recoil on the gun is pretty much non-existent now. So even though the 4-shot time to kill is not anything crazy at around 269 milliseconds, if you land one headshot, it automatically moves the time to kill below 200 milliseconds, which gives it the fastest time to kill for any AR. Now, with that being said, hitting a headshot is not really something you're going to be able to guarantee on a consistent basis, especially for somebody that's less experienced in the game. For players that are super confident in their aim and able to handle the recoil pretty well, because it does still have a pretty fair amount of vertical recoil, the Kilo is going to be an amazing option and could potentially be a number 1 AR in the game. It is primarily because of the vertical recoil and also the difficulty of landing those headshots that I do have the Kilo a little bit lower on the list, because on top of that, you got to take into account the average time to kill. So that's basically time to kill when you average in the number of missed shots, and on a slower rate of fire gun, a missed shot is going to be more punishing. The Kilo does have a much slower rate of fire than our number 2 option, but if you practice with it enough, it may very well for you end up in that number 2 spot. Now, coming in at number 2, we've got a gun that's been in our top 5 for a while and probably not going to be surprising many people. Arguably the easiest to use gun in our top 5, that's going to be the M13. The M13 is incredibly consistent at all ranges, and part of the reason that it's so good is because of the amount of range that you can stack with really no penalty to it. See, the nice thing about the M13 is it actually has a magazine that stacks on an additional 20% range and also gives it a silence effect, pretty much replacing the monolithic suppressor, which gives you a pretty big downside to ADS and bullet spread accuracy. Even though the M13's bullet spread accuracy is just barely worse than the Kilo, which actually has the best bullet spread accuracy of any assault rifle, because of those different elements that you can factor in, it actually becomes a lot easier to use because it has significantly lower vertical recoil as well. And like I mentioned, a lot of this list is geared toward how well guns play for people that might have a lower skill level. The M13 can beam from anywhere on the map, and once again, it's one of those weapons where if you land one headshot, it automatically drops down the time to kill by a pretty significant amount, putting the 4-shot time to kill somewhere in the 210 millisecond range. The 5-shot kill of the M13 and the 4-shot kill of the Kilo are fairly comparable, and because of that, since the M13 does have a faster rate of fire, you have more compensation, which factors into that average time to kill, which we talked about before, and just makes it an overall easier to use gun with not really a whole lot of downside other than that time to kill that you could potentially miss out on if you do hit a headshot. Lastly, coming in at number 1, it's a gun that's been hovering around this number 1 spot for the last couple of seasons. It's going to be the CBR. Even prior to the nerf to the Type 25, the CBR had come into Garena and taken it by storm, with most teams running at minimum about 3 CBRs and sprinkling in some other options here and there. The CBR is going to be able to 4-shot more consistently than the Type 25 or the PPSH. Then on top of that, you got to take into account that it's an SMG, so it's going to have better better mobility than the Type 25. On top of that, you take into account that it's got a base magazine of 50 rounds, which means you basically have one free attachment that you can use on anything you want to. And because of the buff to the horizontal recoil on the gun, you can really build it out to play like an SMG or like an AR if you'd like to, and really make it a replacement for the Type 25. Personally, I would recommend building out an M13 if you want to make an actual ranged build, but if you want to try it out, you can. Even watching some of the Mobile Mayhem matches last night, the CBR was already getting banned, and I've got a feeling pros are going to start to realize more and more, especially on the global side of things, just how good this gun is. So definitely make sure to give it a try, but that is going to wrap up our top 5 guns in Call of Duty Mobile Season 2. Hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, please do me a huge favor. Make sure to drop a like down below. Make sure to subscribe to the squad if you haven't already, and without any more talking, we'll see you guys in the next one.